Every 3 patches, MiHoYo releases 2 new artifact sets, with usually at least one of them being dedicated to a new character that comes out in that same patch. 2 patches ago, we've seen the release of the Wanderer dedicated set, alongside the Paradise Lost set, which was more of a general release. So, next patch we'll see the release of 2 new artifacts, and in this video I will be evaluating them on several characters through a tier list. As always, I won't post the artifact pics or exact effects. If you want to look those up, you can check on several database sites or Reddit. This new artifact release cycle is definitely the weirdest I witnessed since this game came out. We have Baizhu and Kave coming out next patch, so one would expect MiHoYo would release something in that sense, especially because Baizhu in particular doesn't have a perfect fit in terms of artifacts yet. Personally, I expected a dedicated Quicken set, just like they released a dedicated Bloom set in Paradise Lost, but instead we got a handmade set for Dehya and a set that's made for Hydro on-field carries. Starting from the Dehya set, the 2 pieces bonus is a HP buff, and the 4 pieces bonus is an elemental skill and burst damage buff, which goes up depending on how many times you've taken damage with her, off-field or on-field. Each stack lasts 8 seconds, and it goes up to 5 stacks. At full stacks, the artifact will buff those things by 50%, quite good. The Hydro set buffs Hydro damage by 15% with its 2 pieces effect, which by itself is pretty nice, considering it opens up interesting mixed set possibilities with the other Hydro set we already have, the Heart of Depth. Its 4 pieces effects is very similar to the Polar Star weapon passive, meaning it will provide you buffs depending on the moves you use, them being normal attack, elemental skill, charge attack, plunge attack and elemental burst, up to 3 stacks, which will last 8 seconds each. Each of these stacks will grant your character an attack and hydro damage bonus, which goes up to 25% and 15% respectively at full stacks. Note that each of these moves can only count for a maximum of 1 stack, so you can't just spam normal attacks and expect to get full stacks, for example. As you might easily tell, these effects are easier to activate if you use the set on on-field carries, such as Childe and Ayato. So, how good are these artifact sets? Let's start with Childe. Childe is an interesting character in terms of artifacts, because the artifact set that was released to buff him, the Heart of Depth set, wasn't a clear-cut best choice for him. While it provided the best damage performance, it didn't edge out other options by a considerable amount, and it was also clearly worse in certain scenarios, like situations where you needed this burst to hit harder, which aren't uncommon in speedrun contexts. These scenarios favored the combination of Noblesse and Heart of Depth sets more, as that's what buffed his elemental burst the most. The new Hydro set comes with a nice mix of both worlds. In fact, all of its effects buff the entirety of Childe's kit, but there's a kicker. Getting 3 stacks for his elemental burst might be tricky. Current Childe rotations in his international setups involve him using an elemental skill at the start of the rotation to enable double swirl with Kazuha. After that, his next action is either an elemental burst if you use the ranged version of it, or another elemental skill and an attack if you want to use the melee version of it, which does more damage and is generally preferred in speedruns because of that. With the actions I just mentioned, the ranged elemental burst will just get 1 stack. In both of these scenarios, the Noblesse artifact combination I mentioned before actually keeps out damaging the new set just for the burst. The only scenario where the new set becomes better in that sense is when all 3 stacks are active. Luckily, there are ways to do that, although it's mostly for the melee version of the burst. In fact, in Childe rotations you can replace the first elemental skill usage I talked about with his aimed shot instead, something that will grant him an additional stack. After that, you can do your Bennett, Kazuha and Xianling stuff, come back with Childe, use his skill and a normal attack, and then follow it with a full stack burst. For the ranged version of the burst, it's trickier, because you'd have to use both an aimed shot and the elemental skill initially, and a physical normal attack too to get the 3 stacks, 3 actions that consume more rotation time than Childe normally does, which is generally a damage loss. It's up to you to decide whether or not it's worth. For all other damage sources, the new set is a very slight increase over other options, and overall it ends up being a 5 to 6% damage increase for his rotations, depending on how many stacks you can get for his burst. So a decent upgrade for him overall. Reality is more unfortunate for Ayato. As you might have guessed from my previous Childe explanation, the main advantage the new set has over other options is the burst damage increase. Ayato's burst damage in particular has never been stellar, especially in single target situations, where the totality of his burst hits will generally go up to 12. Good for just 60,000 damage per rotation, even assuming he has a 5-star weapon equipped. The issue is also that Ayato uses elemental bursts at the start of the team rotation, and the burst snapshots, so basically you won't have time to accumulate high stacks amounts with him, at least in the first rotation. This is not a big issue for rotations after the first, as if you manage to make your previous rotation end with Ayato action, you can maybe handle it in a way you can keep some stacks active from the previous rotation, and manage to get a 4 stacks burst, but either way it's not a huge difference, since as I said, his burst just isn't that good damage wise. For the rest, during his elemental skill you should be able to get full stacks in most cases, but even then the new set is just a side grade compared to other options, so not worth farming. Dehya suffers a similar fate, since the new set is straight up not a buff for her over the Emblem of Severed Fate set. I got a lot of questions during last month, asking me how things could have changed for her if she received a dedicated set. I always thought they were funny, because Dehya didn't really have a set issue to begin with. Around 80% of her rotation damage at Constellation 0 revolves around her elemental burst, so a perfect scenario for the Emblem of Severed Fate set, and for supportive options, the Tenacity of Millelith set does a fine job. Basically, I never expected her set to be particularly beneficial for her, and MiHoYo has proven me right with this set, since even at full stacks, it's just a side grade compared to Emblem at Constellation 0. It becomes slightly better if Dehya is Constellation 1, since she gets additional HP scalings with that, and outright better if you have her at Constellation 4, which lowers her energy requirements by a lot, and makes the Emblem of Severed Fate set weaker as a result. But I imagine that's a scenario that won't concern most of you. Overall, again, not a set that's worth farming. Other cases are more niche. Yelan could benefit from the combination of the Earth of Depth set and the new set for 2 hydro damage buffs, for teams that make use of her elemental skill to nuke opponents. This is the case for some specific Wailed Yelan runs, where she has access to 2 elemental skills through her Constellation 1, and those can potentially hit very hard with Vape. Still, Yelan already had an option for that, namely the combination of an HP set and the Heart of Depth set, which is actually still better than the new combination if somebody like Kazuha is buffing her. Other cases such as Xingqiu, who can even potentially maintain high stacks count in quickswap teams such as Nahida Hyperbloom, still won't benefit much from the new set, simply because the Emblem of Severed Fate set is just that good for energy-starving characters that rely on their elemental burst for their entire damage output. If you're wondering about even more niche usages, like DPS Kokomi, just don't bother. All in all, in my opinion, farming the new artifacts will be a complete waste of your time and resin, unless you really want your child to deal more burst damage, but even then, you likely have great Heart of Depth and Noblesse pieces in your box, since they're sets that have been out since forever, which means that it's very likely that you won't feel a positive change with the new set. I'm done for today. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!